The waves crashed gently against the twin harbors of Carthage, shimmering under the late afternoon sunday. Bronze-plated ships rocked in rhythm with the sea, their sails painted in crimson and gold, proud emblems of a city that ruled the waters. The smell of salt mixed with iron filled the air, where the clang of hammers against metal echoed through the shipyards, and merchants shouted prices over the cries of seagulls. The marketplace was alive with color and sound, silks from the east, silver from Spain, and spices from lands so distant that few could even name them. Every street pulsed with ambition, every voice carried the same conviction: Carthage was eternal. From the high terraces overlooking the sea, the city gleamed like a jewel of North Africa. Its walls wide enough for chariots to race upon, guarded temples of marble and gold. Beyond them, villas of the wealthy overlooked olive groves that stretched to the horizon. At dusk, when torches were lit along the harbor, their reflections danced on the water like threads of fire. To travelers arriving from across the Mediterranean, Carthage seemed not just powerful, it seemed divine, as if blessed by the gods themselves. But behind every empire's brilliance lies a shadow. And so we ask, how could a city so rich, so advanced, so admired, be erased completely from the face of the earth? How could a civilization that once rivaled Rome vanish in fire and dust, remembered only in fragments of legend? Today we journey through that mystery, through the rise, the glory, and the downfall of Carthage. This is not just the story of armies and conquests. It is the story of pride, of love, of destiny. It is the echo of humanity's oldest lesson, that greatness, when touched by arrogance, becomes fragile. Long before its power stretched across the sea, Carthage began with a woman. Her name was Dido, a queen exiled from her homeland of Tyre, whose courage carved a city from sand and stone. The legends say that when she arrived on the barren coast of North Africa, she asked the local ruler for only as much land as a bull's hide could cover. Cleverly, she cut the hide into thin strips and laid them end to end, encircling a hill by the sea. That hill would become the heart of Carthage. In the soft light of dawn, one can almost imagine her standing there, her cloak whipping in the wind, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and determination. She had lost everything: her home, her brother's trust, the safety of her past. Yet within her burned a vision that would outlive centuries. Around her, workers hauled stone-lit fires and raised the first walls. The city's rhythm was born from her heartbeat. Her people believed she was favored by the gods, for how else could such a dream rise from nothing? But even in its creation, fate planted the seed of tragedy. When the Trojan hero Aeneas arrived, seeking refuge from his own ruined world, Dido welcomed him. Their love, intense and consuming, brought warmth to the queen's lonely heart and hope to her people. The city celebrated, torches burned through the night, and music echoed through the harbor. Yet destiny, cruel and unbending, had other plans. Aeneas was called by the gods to leave to found another city far across the sea, a city that would one day be named Rome. When Dido watched his ship fade into the horizon, grief turned to fury. She built a pyre on the cliffs overlooking the harbor, her voice trembling between love and rage. "From my ashes," she cried, "let eternal war rise between my people and his." And so, with her final breath, she cursed Rome and sealed the fate of both nations for centuries to come. The wind carried her last words across the waves, whispering them into the sails of Carthaginian ships. Generations later, those words would become prophecy. Carthage would indeed rise to challenge Rome, and the world would tremble beneath their clash. But on that first morning, when Dido's city shone bright against the sea, no one could have imagined the cost of such glory. The harbor, the markets, the chants of sailors, they were the heartbeat of a civilization that believed it could never fall. And perhaps that is where every great tragedy begins, not in defeat, but in the unshakable belief that defeat is impossible. This is the story of Carthage, its birth and courage, its rule over the seas, and its fall into legend. A tale of ambition and love, of fire and salt. A reminder that every empire, no matter how radiant, casts a shadow. Tonight we sail back through time to witness it all: the glory, the betrayal, the ashes. The rise and fall of Carthage. The flames of Dido's curse faded into legend, but her city did not die with her. Carthage grew stronger, richer, and prouder than ever. From the ashes of heartbreak rose a power that would one day make empires tremble. The city by the sea had found its destiny to rule the waves of the Mediterranean. At sunrise, the twin harbors awakened like two beating hearts. The circular military port, an engineering wonder, was ringed with hidden docks and storerooms, each holding sleek, bronze-plated warships ready to launch at a moment's notice. The merchant harbor, vast and open, was a forest of masts and sails. The scent of salt, mixed with exotic spices, voices shouted in Phoenician, Greek, Latin, and tongues from lands even farther away. Carthage was the meeting point of the world. From the silver mines of Hispania came bars of gleaming metal. From Britannia, tin and wool. From the heart of Africa, ivory, gold dust, and wild animals destined for royal arenas. Every street hummed with movement. Market stalls overflowed with goods from every corner of the known world. The air was thick with trade and ambition. Carthaginian merchants were more than traders, they were explorers, daring the unknown for profit and glory. They mapped coastlines no one else dared to sail, guided by the stars and the whisper of the wind. In their hands, commerce became empire. But Carthage's greatness was not built on gold alone, it was forged through order and strategy. Its government, unlike the monarchies of the time, was a balance of power, two elected leaders known as suffets, a council of nobles, and a citizens' assembly. It was a system that mixed aristocracy with democracy, an experiment far ahead of its age. To foreign visitors, it felt strangely familiar, even modern. Decisions were debated, policies voted upon generals, chosen for merit as much as lineage. Carthage was not merely rich, it was disciplined, structured, and proud of its reason. Yet behind the Senate's marble walls, ambition stirred. One name echoed through those halls, a name that would define an entire generation: Barca. Hamilcar Barca stood overlooking the docks, his cloak catching the sea breeze. He was not a man of wealth alone, but of vision. His eyes carried the cold fire of a strategist, one who saw beyond the horizon. The Punic Wars had scarred him, Rome's shadow had grown too close, too fast. To Hamilcar, Carthage was not merely a city. It was destiny itself. And destiny, he believed, must never bow. When his soldiers passed, they saluted him with both fear and reverence. He led them not with promises, but with conviction. "We will not yield to Rome," he told his commanders one night, his voice low but burning. "We will rise again stronger, wiser, unstoppable." The torches flickered across his face as if the fire within him refused to be contained. His campaigns in Iberia proved that promise. There, on the rugged hills of Hispania, he rebuilt Carthage's power, brick by brick, coin by coin. He turned young men into soldiers, silver mines into lifeblood. He forged alliances and taught his people that victory was earned, not inherited. In every fortress he raised, in every treaty he signed, he whispered the same dream that Carthage would once again stand above Rome. At night, when the campfires burned low, Hamilcar would sometimes watch his son, young Hannibal, studying the maps spread across the table. The boy's eyes were sharp, mirroring his father's determination. "Do you see this river?" Hamilcar asked, once tracing a line across the parchment. "It separates us from them. Remember it, my son. One day you will cross it, and when you do make them, remember Carthage." The boy said nothing, but in that silence was a vow. Years later, historians would call Hamilcar a general, a statesman, a patriot. But to his people, he was something greater, the architect of Carthage's rebirth. Under his leadership, the city reached a new height. Its ships commanded the seas. Its markets overflowed with riches. Its influence stretched from the Pillars of Hercules to the sands of the Sahara. And as the sun set over the harbors, the sea blazed with reflected gold. From the cliffs, the city seemed eternal, a masterpiece of stone and ambition. The hum of trade, the rhythm of hammers, the laughter of sailors, all sang the same refrain: Carthage will never fall. That was the belief carried in every heart and every coin, stamped with the city's proud emblem. A belief so strong, so absolute, that even the gods themselves might have paused to listen. For now, Carthage stood at its zenith, unrivaled, unstoppable, and utterly convinced that nothing could ever bring it down. The name Barca had become legend, whispered in the markets, sung by soldiers, etched into the hearts of Carthaginians. And in that legacy, a young boy stood beneath the shadow of his father, wide-eyed, determined, unyielding. His name was Hannibal. The firelight flickered across the walls of the temple as Hamilcar placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Before them stood the altar of Baal, its incense thick with the scent of cedar and smoke. The distant murmur of soldiers training outside echoed faintly, a reminder of the world Hannibal was about to inherit. "Come here, my son," Hamilcar said, his voice calm but heavy with purpose. The boy stepped forward, his small hand trembling as his father guided it toward the sacred flame. "Swear to me," Hamilcar whispered. "Swear that you will never be a friend to Rome." The boy's eyes, dark sharp already, carrying the weight of destiny, did not waver. "I swear," he said softly, then louder, "I swear by the gods of Carthage that I will hate Rome and I will make them pay." The temple fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the universe itself had heard and taken note. That moment, the vow of a child would ignite one of the greatest wars in human history. Years passed. The boy became a soldier, the soldier a commander. Hannibal Barca rose through the ranks not by bloodline alone, but by brilliance. He studied every Roman tactic, every weakness in their armor, every fear in their heart. His men followed him not because of his father's name, but because his courage burned brighter than the sun over the desert. When his father died in Spain, Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian army. He stood before his troops, tens of thousands of men hardened by years of battle, and lifted his sword. "Our enemy stands across the sea," he declared, "but if the gods demand it, we will cross the mountains themselves to reach them." The soldiers roared in answer, and so began a march that the world would remember forever. The Alps rose before them like a wall of ice and death. Snow blinded the men, winds cut through armor and flesh, and avalanches swallowed entire columns. The elephants, those mighty symbols of Carthage, slipped and fell into ravines, their cries echoing like thunder. Men froze where they stood, eyes open in eternal defiance of the cold. Yet through it all, Hannibal rode at the front. "Keep moving," he shouted against the storm. "Each step we take, Rome grows weaker." When at last they descended into the plains of Italy, only half the army remained, but their spirits were unbroken. They had done the impossible, they had crossed the roof of the world, and now they would bring Rome to its knees. The first clash came at the river Trebia. Rome marched confidently, expecting another victory to add to their scrolls. But Hannibal had studied them. He waited for the moment when pride became blindness, and then he struck. His cavalry swept around the Roman flanks like a storm, trapping them in a deadly vice. The snow turned red, and the river carried away the fallen. At Lake Trasimene, he did it again. Hidden in the morning fog, his army surrounded the Romans as they marched between the lake and the hills. The silence broke with the sound of horns, and chaos erupted. Entire legions vanished beneath the Carthaginian blades before they could even form ranks. And then came Cannae, the masterpiece of military genius. Outnumbered and encircled, Hannibal turned the Roman advantage against them. His formation bent, then closed like a serpent around its prey. When the dust settled, 70,000 Romans lay dead. It was not just a victory, it was annihilation. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rome, the eternal city, the conqueror of nations, had been broken. Mothers wept in the streets, senators trembled in their marble halls. The message was clear: Carthage had brought Rome to its knees. And yet, beneath the roar of triumph, fate whispered its warning. Because even as Hannibal stood victorious on the blood-soaked fields of Italy, Rome was changing. The defeat did not destroy them, it transformed them. Behind the walls of their wounded city, they began to rebuild. They adapted, learned, hardened. The hunter had awakened the beast. Carthage celebrated, believing the war already won. But in the shadows, Rome was preparing for a revenge so absolute it would echo through time. Rome bled, but it did not die. From the ashes of Cannae, from the smoke of defeat, a new generation of Romans rose, hardened, relentless, and burning with purpose. Among them was a young man who had witnessed the horror firsthand, standing amid the bodies of friends and countrymen. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, and on that cursed battlefield he made a silent vow. He looked toward the distant horizon where Hannibal's banners still fluttered. "You've shown us what fear is," he whispered. "Now we will show you what Rome does with fear." Scipio carried that promise through years of war. While Hannibal's army ravaged Italy, Rome rebuilt from within. They adapted his tactics, studied his maneuvers, and learned to fight fire with fire. What had once been arrogance became discipline. What had once been pride became patience. Rome was transforming and Scipio was its new blade. Meanwhile, far from home, Hannibal waited. His victories had made him a legend, but legends can be lonely. His soldiers still followed him loyal as ever, yet his supply lines were thin, his reinforcements few. Carthage, drunk on the illusion of victory, had forgotten that even the greatest generals need support. Night after night, Hannibal stood alone in his tent, tracing the map of Italy by candlelight. He had fought for nearly 2 decades on foreign soil, and though Rome trembled, it would not fall. The fire in his eyes was still fierce, but behind it flickered the first shadow of doubt. And then came word that Rome had done the unthinkable. Scipio had crossed the sea. The war was coming home to Africa. For the first time, Hannibal was summoned back to defend Carthage itself. When he returned, the city welcomed him like a god reborn. Crowds filled the streets chanting his name, throwing flowers before his feet. But he saw beyond the cheers. He saw the fear behind the smiles, the cracks in the once golden walls. Carthage was not the city he had left. It was softer, complacent, tired. Scipio, young yet sharp as steel, marched toward Carthage with the confidence of a man carrying destiny on his shoulders. 2 worlds, 2 visions of greatness, were now on a collision course. The desert winds rose over the plains of Zama. The morning sun turned the sand into fire. Lines of soldiers stretched as far as the eye could see, Roman red and Carthaginian bronze facing each other under the same merciless sky. The air trembled with tension. Hannibal rode to the front, his armor dull from years of battle, his gaze calm but haunted. Scipio stood across the field, a symbol of youth and renewal, the reflection of everything Rome had become. For a moment, the 2 men simply watched one another. In another life, they might have been allies or even friends. When the horns sounded, the desert exploded. Carthaginian war elephants charged first, their roars shaking the earth. But Scipio had planned for this. His legions opened narrow corridors, letting the beasts thunder harmlessly through before closing ranks again. The Roman infantry advanced in perfect formation, disciplined, relentless. Dust filled the air. Steel clashed with steel. Hannibal's veterans fought with desperate courage. Their spears struck true, their shields held firm. But the rhythm of battle had changed. Scipio's maneuvers outmatched every trick Hannibal had once used against Rome. Slowly, inevitably, the Carthaginian lines began to falter. Through the storm of dust and blood, Scipio pressed forward. His voice carried above the chaos. For Rome, for every life lost at Cannae, Hannibal saw it, the tide turning his army breaking. He dismounted, gripping his sword, not out of hope but defiance. Around him his men fell, their banners trampled beneath Roman boots. The world he had built, the oath he had sworn, all crumbled in the sands of Zama. And then silence. When it was over, the desert was littered with the wreckage of dreams. The wind howled through the emptiness, lifting the Carthaginian banners torn and burned. Hannibal stood still, the last general of a dying empire. He looked once more toward the sea, where the sun sank in crimson light. Carthage did not fall for lack of courage, he murmured to himself. It fell because it lost its moment. That night, Hannibal left the city he had sworn to protect. Alone, he rode into the vastness of the desert, his shadow stretching long over the dunes. Behind him, Carthage wept, but no one followed. His figure grew smaller against the golden horizon until it disappeared, completely swallowed by time and memory. And so ended the greatest rivalry the ancient world had ever known, 2 men bound by destiny, divided by empire. The sands of Zama had barely cooled when Rome decided that victory was not enough. The rival they feared, the city that once dared to challenge their dominion, still stood wounded but alive, and for Rome that was intolerable. Nearly 50 years passed, and yet the memory of Hannibal haunted every Roman dream. Carthage must be destroyed, the Senator Cato repeated at the end of every speech, his voice echoing through the marble halls of the Republic. And so, in 149 BC, Rome returned to finish what it had begun. The Third Punic War was not a battle, it was an execution. When the Roman legions appeared on the horizon, the people of Carthage refused to flee. Mothers carried stones to the walls, children forged weapons from broken tools. Old men took up arms that hadn't been lifted in decades. There was no surrender in their hearts. They would fight as their ancestors once had until the very end. The siege lasted 3 years. The city that had once ruled the sea was now encircled by it, cut off, starved, forgotten by the world it once commanded. Every day, catapults hurled flaming projectiles into the streets. Every night the sky glowed red and the cries of the wounded blended with the roar of fire, yet within the walls the people endured. They fought from the rooftops, from alleys, from shadows. Roman soldiers described them as demons of the ruins, fighters who refused to die quietly. Women boiled leather to feed their children. Priests prayed over wells that had turned to dust. And still, the banners of Carthage fluttered defiantly in the smoke. When the Romans finally breached the gates, they found not a city but a tomb. Street by street, house by house, Carthaginians fought with whatever they could wield: swords, stones, bare hands. The air was thick with ash. Flames consumed temples that had stood for centuries. The great harbors, once alive with ships and laughter, now boiled with fire. A Roman soldier later wrote, "I could not tell if we were killing them or if they were killing themselves." As the last resistance collapsed, the survivors were gathered in the square, exhausted, hollow-eyed, their faces lit by the burning of their own city. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stared at the ruins, silent and unblinking, as if trying to memorize what was left before it vanished. Then, amid the chaos, a lone voice rose, a Carthaginian woman clutching her child standing atop the rubble. "You can burn our walls," she shouted, "but you will never burn our name." The soldiers hesitated. For a brief moment, even Rome seemed to falter before that kind of defiance. But the order was given. The fires continued until there was nothing left to burn. The city that once rivaled Rome was turned to dust. Historians say that when the last embers faded, the Roman general Scipio Aemilianus, descendant of the man who had defeated Hannibal, stood amid the destruction and wept. When asked why, he said, "Because one day this will be Rome." They say he was right. They burned Carthage, but the flames did not stop at its walls. They lit a warning that still flickers across history: power without mercy consumes itself. The Romans salted the earth so that nothing would grow there again. Yet time has a strange sense of justice. Today the ruins of Carthage still rest beneath the Tunisian sun, silent but not forgotten. The wind that sweeps over them carries more than dust, it carries memory. For Carthage teaches us something enduring, that greatness is not measured by how many enemies we crush, but by what we choose to build after loss. It reminds us that arrogance is a fragile crown, and even the mightiest empire must someday answer for its pride. To the modern ear, this story is not just ancient history, it is a mirror. It tells us that civilizations rise not through conquest, but through compassion, through wisdom, through the courage to change. And so as you picture those ruins by the sea glowing orange under the setting sun, remember, Carthage does not lie silent in defeat. It speaks still through the stones, through the ashes, through time itself, whispering, "Every glory comes with a price." If you believe history still speaks to us, if you believe its lessons are worth remembering, share this story. Let more people hear the voice of Carthage, so its fire may burn again, not as destruction but as remembrance.